I hated Mother's Day growing up. I wanted my mother to be different. I wanted my life to be different. I was ashamed of who my mother was, and I was ashamed of what my life was because of her. The house I grew up in was floor-to-ceiling piles everywhere, bags and boxes. My mother held on to everything most people would throw away. Plastic bags, containers, jars, little pieces of foil, paper, broken pencils, the shavings from the pencil sharpener. Everything was held on to. We had places where we could be. There was a sofa I could sit on when we watched TV, but there were piles behind me, piles in front of me. There was a place at the dining room table where I could do my schoolwork, but there were piles everywhere else where her most immediate things were kept. We had a place at the kitchen table, but our legs would hit the piles under the table. There was the dirty clothes pile outside my bedroom door, filled high where we put our dirty clothes, and when my mother had a chance to do a load of laundry, it was a happy day. There was the pile I had to climb over to get to the shower, and that wasn't cleared very often. I was ashamed of how unclean my life was, how unclean my mother was. I hated my life. I couldn't understand my mother. She would ask us to do things in a very compulsive way. There was one right way to do things. And my mother sometimes would go into dark places, and she'd retreat to her bedroom, first crying and telling us that we didn't understand her, we didn't care about her. And she might be there for hours, she might be there for days. And I remember being at her bedroom door, pleading with her to come out, doing whatever we needed to do, whatever apology we needed to make, whatever concession we had to make, to get her to at least come out to the little bit more normal place. I wanted to escape my world. I wanted everything to be different. I wanted the house to burn down. I wanted everything in it to burn as well. College was my escape. And when I went to college, my lens on my mom shifted a little bit. I heard the word hoarder for the first time and realized I wasn't the only one who grew up in a world like that. I learned how debilitating depression can be as a mental illness. And I started making trips back to Italy to try to understand my mother's story. A little backstory on my mom. My dad was 18 when he came to this country to try to find better opportunity. And a few years later, after coming, he returned to Italy in the hopes of finding a wife. My mother's sister was already married to my father's brother, so educated city girl meets uneducated country boy after knowing him only 4 weeks, and they decide to marry. My mom comes to this country not knowing the language, the culture. She needed to learn to be a wife and soon a mother to 4 daughters. My mom fought bitterly with my dad because she thought this would be a temporary trip to the States. She thought they would at some point return back. They went to celebrate my first birthday in Italy, but then after that, it would be 30 years before my parents went back, because my mom knew if she went back, she would never come back. And my dad would not give in to this one. I wanted to try to help my mom. I would offer to go to her home and help her sort through the things in whatever methodical way would make sense to her so she could come out from underneath these piles. No help wanted. I would try to encourage her to seek professional help. No outside intervention at all. All my mother ever asked for was patience and understanding, and I couldn't give it. I remember driving home and saying, this time, it's gonna be different. I'm gonna look past the house, I'm gonna be happy with my mother, and I'm gonna let it go. And I'd pull up to the house, and all that accumulated bitterness would just weigh down on me. I felt ashamed no longer of my house and my mother, because I left it. But now I felt ashamed that I couldn't help my mom, but probably more that I didn't want to help my mother. I didn't know how, and I didn't want to. I couldn't. I felt a lot of guilt about that. When my mom became a nonna, things got a little better. There were some pile-free zones in the house so husbands and grandchildren can come visit. My mother always seemed very happy when she came to my house because it was a nice, tidy house, except she'd go through my garbage and she'd take whatever she thought was useful and she'd bring it back to her house. My children were never ashamed of their Nonna. They just knew her as a place of Italian culture. Her home is a place where there's that lovely Italian culture and a curiosity, but they didn't have the shame that I had growing up. My mom died about 10 years ago, and I wept, not for the mom I lost, but for the mom I never had, but probably more for a life that could have been something so different in another place, in another time. It's taken me a long time to deal with the shame I had as a child, but I've finally been able to embrace my mother's mental illness and have more compassion for her story, to forgive her for all that I felt as a child. It's been a longer time for me to try to figure out how to forgive myself for feeling I've abandoned her. My son asked me not too long ago, "Mom, what do you want to be called when you're a grandmother?" And my first thought was, not Nonna. But, you know, I'm feeling differently about that now, and I feel I've let go of the skeleton enough to feel that that would make me very happy. Thank you.